Hi, I'm Marlene. My family mocked my basement-level paycheck life right in front of their guests, while I stood there, smiling like it didn't cut me wide open. They said I was figuring things out, that I was just behind. But what they were really doing was writing me out of their stories. One photo, one inheritance, one whispered dinner party joke at a time. I stayed quiet. For years. But what happens when the quiet one starts documenting everything? What happens when she stops asking for a seat at the table and builds her own? Would you keep playing along if your own family saw you as an embarrassment? Or would you finally stop smiling? It had been over a year since I'd last been invited to one of Callista's dinner parties. I used to tell myself it was because I was busy, that they didn't want to bother me with all their gatherings. But deep down, I knew better. So when her message came, formal, almost sterile, I paused for a moment before answering. Sure, I'll be there. I showed up 10 minutes early, as I always did. Callista's home gleamed with the kind of curated elegance that made you hesitate before sitting down. White marble counters, crystal pendant lights, minimalist art on every wall. It felt more like a showroom than a home, but that was her style. Everything in place, no room for smudges. Callista greeted me with that rehearsed half-hug of hers and a quick glance over my shoulder, like she was already checking for someone more important. Lyle, her husband, stood by the wine cart in a navy blue pullover, swirling a glass like he had a clue what he was doing. Vera, our mother, floated around, offering bruschetta and small talk to strangers she wanted to impress. Sable leaned against the island, phone in hand, always too busy, but never actually busy. I told myself I was here to enjoy the evening, to be part of the family again. Maybe, I hoped, this time I wouldn't be the background noise. It didn't take long to prove me wrong. Callista had gathered a mix of people, colleagues from her firm, some of Lyle's tech friends, a few social climbers from their neighborhood. I was seated at the end of the table, near the kitchen entry, sandwiched between a woman who ran a wellness startup and a man who introduced himself as In Mergers. They nodded politely when I said I worked at the public library. During introductions, Callista smiled sweetly and said, "This is my sister, Marlene. She's doing some great work at the library, like a little community gig." Lyle, without missing a beat, laughed. "Yeah, and if she ever loses that gig, we'll have to put her on the family payroll, right?" The table chuckled. Someone said, "Must be nice to have a fallback plan." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I smiled. Because that's what you do when your dignity is chipped in public. You smile like it's nothing. Then, a woman in a red silk blouse asked, "So what exactly do you do there?" I explained that I coordinated literacy programs, managed local archives, helped underprivileged teens find resources. But I could see it in her eyes. She stopped listening halfway through, already turning back to the guy from M&A. Dinner went on. They passed around the truffle risotto like it was salvation, laughed about ski trips and second homes in Vermont. Every now and then, someone would drop a phrase like, "scaling up," or "IPO window," and I'd just nod, sipping my water, pretending it made sense. At one point, Vera clinked her glass and said, "Isn't it nice when everyone's doing so well?" She glanced at me like I was the exception. I excused myself under the pretense of helping in the kitchen. Callista was already in there, laughing with a guest from her company. "She's sweet," she said, slicing lemon tarts. "Just not built for much more than she's doing now. You know?" Her voice was soft, like she thought kindness could dilute the insult. I stood just out of view, next to the microwave, my reflection looking back at me in the metal door. The kind of smile I wore was one you practiced in the mirror for years, meant to keep people from asking too many questions. That was when it clicked. I wasn't a sister to her. I was her stage prop, the contrast she used to highlight how far she'd climbed. I went back to the table, sat down, and someone joked about investing in Bitcoin. I smiled and said, "That's okay. I don't make enough to plan for the future." The table laughed again. This time, I let them. But something in me shifted. Not because they laughed, But because I understood, finally, I'd let them. I stopped expecting kindness, started watching instead. I watched how Callista only used the word family when there was a photo op involved. How Vera praised everyone's accomplishments except mine, unless it made her look charitable. How Sable nodded along to jokes she wouldn't dare make herself, but never once told them to stop. After dessert, I helped gather plates. Callista placed a manicured hand on my shoulder and said, "Thanks, sis. Couldn't have pulled this off without you." I turned to her, smiled wide, and said, "You're right. You couldn't." And I meant every syllable. Later that night, lying in the basement of our childhood home, staring at the same old popcorn ceiling, I thought about every time I had smiled just to keep the peace, every time I made excuses for them, every time I believed they'd change if I just stayed quiet enough. That was the last night I'd let them laugh at me. The next time they brought up my paycheck, it wouldn't be a punchline. It would be their reckoning. 3 days had passed since the dinner that cracked something inside me. I hadn't spoken a word to anyone upstairs since. Not that anyone came downstairs to check. The basement had become more than a temporary crash pad. It was a quiet, unfinished museum of being tolerated, not welcomed. The pipes creaked overhead as people walked across the kitchen floor. Every step echoed above me like a soft reminder. I was underneath. And I wasn't just beneath them physically. I was beneath their notice. The morning light didn't reach the basement window. I woke to the same gray half-light and the sound of Vera's voice above, giving orders about folding chairs and paper napkins. It was her birthday weekend, a tradition in our family that had once meant balloons, store-bought cake, and an awkward group photo with crooked smiles. This year, Vera decided on something tasteful, a brunch spread with little labels for each dish and enough mimosas to keep judgment sweet. Nobody asked me to help, but I woke up early anyway and began baking a cake from scratch. Her favorite, lemon pound with raspberry glaze. I knew where she kept the good mixing bowls, even if she never admitted they were good because I picked them out. By the time I crept upstairs with the cake cooling on a rack, Callista and Sable had arrived, empty-handed but full of commentary. Vera greeted them like visiting dignitaries. "Just in time, girls," she said, kissing both cheeks like we were somewhere in Manhattan. Callista wore a fitted green blouse and high heels that clicked across the tile like punctuation. Sable had on yoga pants and a top that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Neither of them glanced at the cake I'd spent hours preparing. Vera, without hesitation, took a store-bought tiramisu from Sable's hand and placed it squarely in the center of the dining table. My cake was gently shifted to the sideboard, behind a vase of artificial tulips. "Oh, that looks nice too, Marlene," Vera said. "Maybe we'll slice into it later." I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. Just nodded, placing my dish next to it, careful not to let the foil touch the frosting. The guests arrived shortly after. Neighbors, ladies from church, 1 or 2 of Vera's bridge partners. I stayed in the kitchen, replenishing ice and stacking used napkins. At one point, Vera called out, "Can someone clear the appetizer plates?" That someone was always me. As I collected dishes, I overheard Callista whispering near the hallway. "She's good with chores. Let's not make her feel too bad. She's trying." "She's trying." That line landed harder than most insults. Trying, like I was running to catch up to where they were born standing. I continued stacking plates, then made my way to the sink. The party's laughter bubbled from the other room while I stood over a mess of lipstick-stained glasses and half-eaten fruit. My hands worked automatically. In the corner of the shelf above the toaster, I saw it. An envelope with my name and Vera's handwriting, unopened, still leaning from months ago. It had been my birthday then. She had said she was too busy, that we'd do something later. I guess later meant never. Just then, Vera's voice rang out. "Let's get a photo before the food disappears." I dried my hands, stepped into the living room, in time to see them lowering the phone, laughing. "Oh," Vera said, spotting me. "We already took one. Don't worry, honey. We'll Photoshop you in later." They all chuckled, like it was a perfectly reasonable solution. I smiled again. I was getting good at it. Not the joyful kind, but the polite kind. The kind you use to make sure people don't feel guilty for forgetting you until it's convenient. When the guests were gone and the house had settled, I sliced a small piece of my own cake. Nobody had touched it. I wrapped the rest in foil and took it with me downstairs. The basement smelled faintly of old books and laundry detergent. I sat on the edge of the bed, fork in hand, staring at nothing in particular. Sometimes being in the room doesn't mean you're part of it. You can smile, serve, bake the cake, but they'll still forget to include you in the picture, unless they need to edit you in afterward. I opened my laptop, created a folder, titled it, Receipts, for me. Not to be shared yet, just saved. A collection of moments they would call exaggerated if I ever dared to speak them aloud. I didn't know how long I'd stay, but I knew this time I wouldn't leave empty-handed. 4 days after Vera's birthday, I was grabbing my coat from the hallway hook when something on the wall made me stop. It was new, a framed photo, freshly mounted, slightly crooked. The kind of detail you only notice when something else feels off. I moved closer. There they were, Callista, Lyle, Sable, Vera, standing in front of the living room window, all smiling like a toothpaste ad. I studied the image, letting my eyes comb every face. My stomach sank. I had been at that dinner. I took that picture. I'd stood by the kitchen island, angling the camera just right so the chandelier wouldn't glare off Vera's glasses. But I wasn't in the photo, not even in the background, not cropped, not blurred, just not there. They didn't forget me, I whispered to myself. They edited me out. My fingertips tingled like I'd touched a live wire. I backed away slowly, coat forgotten, eyes locked on the perfect illusion of family smiling without me. It wasn't the first time. My mind spiraled back to the community bake sale last summer. I'd baked 6 dozen apple hand pies from scratch. Callista arrived with a printed sign that said, "From the kitchen of Callista Grace." Vera placed it front and center. I didn't protest. It was just a bake sale. Then there was the library literacy initiative I'd built from scratch, the outreach program that got teenagers in underserved neighborhoods access to tutoring. A local charity wrote a feature about it. The newsletter ran a quote from Callista. "My family is passionate about education," it read, above her photo in a tailored navy blazer. Back then, I told myself it was fine. It was just family. No need to make things awkward. But now the air tasted metallic. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was design. I climbed the stairs to the attic quietly, each creak of the wood sounding louder than it should have. I opened the storage room where Vera kept photo boxes labeled in faded Sharpie. Christmas, graduations, vacations. I sat cross-legged on the dusty rug and started sifting. The patterns emerged fast. Callista always front and center, Sable often to her side. I was there, sure, just not where you'd find me at first glance. Always at the edge of the frame, partly blocked, blinking. In one picture from Sable's graduation, my head was turned, half out of shot. But I remembered being there. I held the camera when it wasn't a tripod. I carried the extra chairs. I handed out the programs. Even as a child, I'd been a background fixture in my own life. The attic door creaked behind me. Sable stood there, leaning against the doorframe like she had something better to be doing. "You saw the new photo, huh?" she said, voice light. "Don't overthink it. You weren't in frame." I didn't look up, just replied, "I took that picture." There was a pause, long enough for her to realize it wasn't a question. She shifted her weight, murmured something about Vera needing help downstairs, and disappeared. I didn't follow. That night, back in the basement, I stared at the same cracked paint on the ceiling I'd memorized years ago. I opened my laptop, found the folder I'd named Receipts, for me. I added 2 new subfolders. One was titled Photoshopped Memories. Inside it, I placed the picture from the hallway, along with a note. Taken by me, not pictured me. The second was stolen contributions. I attached the scanned newsletter, the bake sale flyer, even screenshots of Vera's Facebook post thanking Callista for single-handedly saving the youth. If they insisted I was never there, I would build a case strong enough to outlast memory. They could erase me from their walls, but I would make sure I echoed in their silence. The house was louder than usual when I got back from work that evening. I'd left the library early after canceling a teen tutoring session, some excuse about needing to catch up on planning, but really, I just needed to breathe somewhere else. The weight of being both visible and ignored had worn down my patience in a way I couldn't quite explain, even to myself. I parked down the block to avoid being noticed and entered through the side door, the one off the laundry room. That door never creaked, never drew attention. I didn't go downstairs. I wasn't in the mood to crawl back into the basement just yet. I figured I'd pour myself a glass of water, maybe sit in the sunroom if it was empty. The kitchen was full of voices. Laughter floated in from the hallway, and I recognized Callista's cadence immediately. Half sugar, half something that always made people lean in. The moment I heard my name, I stopped short behind the pantry wall. "She's complicated," Callista was saying to someone I didn't recognize. "We all do our best to help her feel like she belongs, but some people just don't want to change." Another voice joined in. Sable's, I was sure of it. "She means well, but at some point, don't you have to stop trying to fix what's broken?" I didn't move. My hand gripped my phone so tightly, I felt the plastic case flex beneath my fingers. "I mean," Callista added with a chuckle, "she's not a bad person. She just doesn't add anything. She's like wallpaper. You don't really notice it until it peels." Someone laughed. I backed away slowly, careful not to let my shoes squeak on the tile, and retreated to the guest bathroom. I sat on the closed lid of the toilet, locked the door, and stared at my hands. They were shaking, not with surprise, but with confirmation. That's what made it worse. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, or maybe just retreated to their own worlds, I opened my laptop in the basement. I hadn't planned on checking my email, but habit is funny like that. The subject line caught my eye immediately. Family budget planning, for discussion. It was a group thread between Vera, Callista, and Sable. Vera had written, "Let's go over the shared expenses for this year's holiday plans. Marlene doesn't really contribute, so we'll need to cover her portion like always. I'll mention something to her if needed." Callista replied, "Honestly, she'd probably be relieved not to be included. She gets uncomfortable when things get real." I read it 3 times before realizing something. My name was on the CC line. Someone had accidentally included me in their little financial autopsy. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a screenshot and dropped it into my Receipts for Me folder. I renamed the subfolder, Not Mistakes. The next morning, the dining room was set for another meal. Not formal, not announced, but just enough that it required place settings and warmed scones. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't overheard their deconstruction of my character the night before. Like I hadn't read every dismissive word typed with such offhand cruelty. Callista looked up and said, "Oh, didn't know you were joining." "I live here," I said. Smiled, took a sip of my coffee. Vera placed a plate in front of me. "You're welcome to help with the setup if you have a moment." "Of course," I said, standing, stacking plates. "Wouldn't want to be just wallpaper." Callista stiffened. No one responded. Through the entire breakfast, I said nothing else of consequence. I nodded when needed, laughed when expected. Inside, I was cataloging everything. Each glance, each pause, each fake laugh that never reached their eyes. It wasn't about being angry anymore. Anger made me flinch. This was different. This was precision. After the dishes were done, and the dishwasher hummed behind me, I opened my email once more, drafted a new message, BCC'd it to myself, attached the screenshots, added a note at the top. For future reference. I didn't send it. I just saved it to the folder. They think their words vanish when the wine flows. I don't drink anymore, but I remember everything. It was a Saturday afternoon when I pulled into the driveway and noticed too many unfamiliar cars lined along the curb. The license plates weren't from around here. Connecticut, New Jersey, some plates so new they still had dealer tags. I sat in the car for a minute longer than I needed to, letting the engine idle like it might somehow give me time to prepare for whatever this was. I hadn't been told about anything. No text, no message, nothing on the calendar, but the voices and laughter spilling from the windows made it clear something was happening. Not for me, never for me. I slipped through the laundry room entrance, trying to be invisible in a house that had always preferred me that way. As I reached the hallway near the stairs, I heard Vera's voice ringing with that familiar high-pitched charm she reserved for outsiders. "And down here," she said, pausing with the same chuckle I'd heard at every brunch and charity mixer, "is where my youngest is figuring things out. It's cozy enough for now." A murmur of polite pity followed. Someone said, "Oh, bless her heart." Another voice, clipped and too cheerful, "Well, at least she's close to family." I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood frozen at the bottom of the steps, while a group of women I didn't know stood a few feet above me, peering down toward the closed basement door like it was a museum exhibit labeled, "Struggles of the Faintly Employed." They didn't open the door. That wasn't the point. I wasn't supposed to hear it. By the time they'd moved on to Vera's renovated powder room and repurposed guest suite, I was already in the kitchen, pretending to drink water. Callista sent me a message a few hours later. "Mom said you were home earlier? Sorry if the church ladies startled you." I didn't reply. I screenshotted it instead, added it to my folder. No need to feed them with responses they could twist into gratitude. Silence, I'd learned, carried more weight than words when used properly. They had taught me to stay quiet, to avoid making things uncomfortable. I was just doing what they raised me to do, only now I was doing it for me, not them. That night, after the last car had pulled away and the house grew still, I sat on the edge of the bed in the basement and opened a new draft in my email. Subject line, verbatim. I copied down what I'd heard, word for word, even the tone. I attached the message from Callista, then walked back upstairs to snap a photo of the basement door cracked open with a pair of heels visible at the top of the stairs. No one noticed me. When I came back down, I whispered into the dark, "This is how you build history no one can deny." I didn't cry, didn't scream, I documented. That's what I do. What I've always done. The next morning, the sun filtered through the tiny basement window, just enough to make my laptop screen glow faintly. I checked the folder, receipts, for me, and created a new one inside, public versions. I wasn't planning to release anything, not yet, but I wanted it organized. When you've been accused of being messy all your life, precision becomes a kind of rebellion. Later that day, while folding laundry in the corner, another text came in from Callista. "Everything okay?" No punctuation this time. Maybe she sensed the shift. I stared at it, let the words hang there for a moment, then smiled. A real one this time, the kind that doesn't need to be polite. I hit delete. They think silence is a weakness, but it's a language I speak fluently now. You taught me to stay silent. Now I'll use it better than you ever did. The voicemail came mid-morning. I was shelving returns at the library, trying to stay present, focused on the rhythm of decimal systems and dust jackets, when I saw the missed call from my credit union. Their message was calm, professional. "We noticed unusual activity associated with your name on a secondary account. Please contact us at your earliest convenience." I paused. I hadn't opened anything new. No new card, no new loan. My gut didn't twist at first. I assumed it was a scam or some clerical mix-up, until I called back, and the woman on the other end mentioned the mailing address linked to the account, Callista's. I felt a sudden drop in my chest, like I'd missed a step going downstairs. I didn't ask any more questions. Just thanked her for the heads up and said I'd come in directly. The credit union lobby was quiet, beige, forgettable. A man in a maroon tie ushered me into a glass-walled office and brought up my file. He pointed to a form on the screen. "There was a joint credit application filed under your name last week," he said. "You're listed as the primary." I stared at him. "I didn't file anything." He blinked, then turned the screen toward me. The application was neatly filled. Income approximated. Contact info matched. There it was. My name, signature forged. And below it, in the cosigner field, Callista Vera Grace. "She told us you two were starting a small consulting venture," he added, voice dropping into a tone I'd come to recognize as embarrassment wrapped in empathy. "Marketing for local nonprofits." I didn't say a word. I just nodded and asked for the paperwork to be printed. He complied, slid the pages into a manila envelope like he was handling evidence. I walked out with the folder under my arm and my jaw locked. The kind of fury I felt wasn't hot. It was frigid, controlled, the kind of rage that doesn't rise, it concentrates. That night, back at Vera's house, I entered through the front this time. I didn't sneak, I didn't hide. They wanted me small, I'd give them quiet. But I wouldn't give them invisible. From the hallway, I heard Vera on speakerphone in the dining room. She was talking to someone, I assumed her lawyer, though she never said names when she was speaking carefully. "We'll just revert to the older version of the will," she said casually. "It's cleaner that way. We don't want any confusion or delays, especially if Marlene decides to relocate again. It's not personal." I didn't need to hear more. Not personal. She meant it like a footnote, like an update to a document, as if I were a formatting issue. "They didn't cut me out," I whispered to myself. "They just edited me like I was a typo." I went straight to the basement and pulled out my laptop. I laid out every piece I had. The printed application from the bank, the past version of the will Vera once proudly emailed me before she forgot she had, the email thread about holiday finances. I renamed the folder Legacy Theft. Inside, I added a new document and began typing. Credit fraud initiated by Callista. Will revision excluding me without notification. Financial exclusion pattern since 2021. Social misrepresentation. See basement tour remarks. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe too hard. I documented. It was how I survived in this family. I may not have been at the center, but I saw everything from the edges. And now I would leave footprints they couldn't erase. The next morning, I sent a password-protected zip file to a friend from college, someone who now worked in estate law in Buffalo. Subject line, "Do not open until necessary." In the body of the email, I wrote one line. "For the day they say I never mattered." Then I closed my laptop. I first heard about the Sunday brunch from Mrs. Hanley across the street, not my own mother. I was bringing in the recycling when she called out, "You must be excited for all the family coming in this weekend." I blinked at her, smiled, and said, "Oh, yeah, should be lovely." That night, I checked the group chat. Still silent. No mention of the brunch, no time, no request for help, just like every other time. But something in me decided not to hide this time. I wasn't going to crash the event. I simply wanted to see how far they'd go to pretend I didn't exist. So, on Sunday morning, I got up early, dressed in a blue blouse I knew Vera used to like, and walked upstairs. My shoes barely made a sound as I passed the basement threshold. The table was set. 12 place settings, 12 name cards in scripted gold print. I scanned every name, knowing before I even started that mine wouldn't be there. I made 13. No one noticed me right away. Vera came bustling in from the kitchen, cheeks rosy from the oven heat or excitement, I couldn't tell. When she saw me, her face flickered. "Oh," she said with a laugh that tried to play casual. "I thought you were working today, sweetie." "It's Sunday," I said, steady. "The library's closed." She didn't answer, just smoothed a napkin and avoided my eyes. One of the aunts, sipping from a mimosa glass, leaned toward another and said, not quietly enough, "She still lives here?" I didn't flinch. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter like I belonged. Because I did. Hours passed in polite conversation and brittle laughter. I was barely addressed. A few guests said hello, but most just drifted around me like I was part of the furniture. I stood, sat, helped bring out the quiche, unasked, and kept my mouth closed, like always. After the last slice of cake was plated and the conversations turned to travel plans and retirement savings, I returned to the basement. The door creaked behind me, and I had barely taken off my shoes when Callista knocked. She didn't wait to be invited in. "Hey," she said too brightly. "So Mom was thinking, we might need the basement next weekend. Aunt Clara and Uncle Ray are staying through the holiday, and the guest room's a bit cramped. Would you mind, just for a few days, finding somewhere else to stay?" She spoke like she was asking me to move my coat, not my life. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I'd already started packing days ago. I just hadn't told anyone yet. "You want the basement?" I thought to myself. "I'll leave it better than I found it. With evidence." That evening, the house slowly emptied. Guests left with plates of leftovers, plastic wrap pulled taut over dishes no one really wanted. I wiped down counters, loaded the dishwasher, and stacked napkins like an unpaid caterer. While putting away platters in the hallway closet, I reached for a container on the top shelf, and something fell. An old gift bag, pink ribbon still curled. Inside was the birthday card I'd given Vera last year, and beside it, a wrapped box with a tiny tag that said, "To Marlene, from Aunt Judith." It had never been opened. I stood there for a long time, gift in one hand, disbelief in the other. "They don't forget me," I whispered. "They just store me where it's convenient." Back in the basement, I opened my laptop and created a new document. Last week in this house. No drama, no metaphors, just facts. The brunch, the missing name card, the reused gift, and finally, the request to leave. I typed the last line slowly. "They're preparing to make me leave. They just don't know I already planned my exit." I was halfway through my afternoon walk when I heard the laughter. It drifted down the block like smoke, unmistakably theirs. I turned the corner and saw the familiar cluster of cars parked outside Vera's house, the same luxury brands lined up like soldiers reporting for duty. A quick check of my phone confirmed what I already knew. No message, no invite, no warning. Still in my walking shoes, I slipped through the side entrance. The house was humming. Voices echoed from upstairs, a clinking of glasses, forks tapping porcelain. It was a full gathering, again. And just like last week's brunch, I hadn't been counted. From the floor vent in the hallway, I heard them. The words, at first, were faint. But as I sat quietly by the vent, back against the wall, they became sharp. "She's not part of the long-term planning," Callista said. "Let's just keep it tight." There was no hesitation, no discomfort. Sable chimed in. "It's not about being cruel, it's about clarity. The ones who are present should benefit." And Vera, in that practiced calm tone she always used when pretending not to take sides, added, "It's not malicious, it's just practical." I didn't move. I didn't cry. I opened the voice memos app and hit record. Just for me, just to have it. Practical erasure, I thought. They'd scrub me from the picture like a smudge on glass. That night, when the house finally settled into its usual hush, I sat on the edge of my bed. If I could still call that space mine. I pulled out the folders I'd been curating for months. Screenshots, clipped emails, old texts, photos they never knew I had. Then I zipped it all together and titled it simply, "Just so we're clear on the narrative." I didn't second-guess the recipients. I sent the file to every extended relative still breathing, second cousins, Dad's sister in Tampa, even Vera's church friend who once hosted the prayer breakfast. No message, no explanation, just the file and a subject line. I stared at the sent confirmation for a long time, then leaned back in my chair, breathing slower than I had in weeks. The replies started rolling in within an hour. From a cousin I hadn't seen since high school. "Are you okay?" Another. I had no idea this was happening. One message stood out. From my father's sister, Aunt Lillian. We hadn't spoken in years. "Your mother should be ashamed," she wrote. "But I imagine she won't be. People like her don't see what they do. They see what they need." I didn't respond. To any of them. I didn't need sympathy. I needed silence to speak for once. I spent the next hour reading and archiving every message. I breathed in the disbelief, the confusion, the awkward apologies. They were the kind of responses people gave when their curated idea of your life shattered in their inbox. Then, after the buzz quieted, I composed one final message. This one was not for the wider audience. It went to exactly 3 people: Vera, Callista, and Sable. No preamble, no apology. "Thank you for everything. I won't be needing anything else from you." I hit send. Then I shut the laptop with both hands, slowly, like closing the lid on a casket. I packed a small duffel bag, folding only what mattered, what I'd bought for myself, earned for myself. I didn't take the framed photo of us in Vermont, or the tea set Vera gave me one Christmas after a silent fight. I didn't want their things. I wanted space. I turned out the light in the basement, looked around one last time at the place they said I was figuring things out, and locked the door behind me. The motel smelled like old carpet and microwave popcorn. I hadn't planned on staying there long, just long enough to be somewhere other than that house, somewhere I didn't have to pretend I was invisible to stay safe. I paid cash. No return address. No note left behind. The bed creaked whenever I shifted. The air conditioner made a low, wheezing sound, like it, too, was tired of being relied on. I lay there in the dark with the glow of my phone lighting up every 10 minutes, like clockwork. Missed call. Missed call. Voicemail, text, repeat. Vera, Callista, even Sable, who usually preferred silence to involvement. I didn't answer. Not one of them. I watched the screen light up, fade, light up again. Then I let it die on the nightstand. I wasn't waiting for a specific message. I just needed to see them try. Even if it was too late. By mid-morning the next day, I started receiving forwarded messages. A cousin I barely spoke to sent a screenshot of a group chat. Callista had posted something like, "She misunderstood the situation. It wasn't meant to be cruel, just a lot of stress, miscommunication." Someone had replied, "Then why does it read like a press release?" A family friend I'd forgotten still had my email address wrote, "You said it without screaming. That's what makes it hit harder." I read it twice. It felt strange to see words of support. Not because they didn't matter, but because I had stopped expecting them. The phone buzzed again that afternoon. A voice note this time, Sable. I debated for a second, then played it. "You didn't have to air it like that," she started. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed. "There were better ways to handle it." Pause. "But I guess we all knew. We just didn't expect you to say it first." That part caught me off guard. I listened to the message twice. Didn't delete it. Didn't respond either. It just sat there, a time-stamped moment of unintended honesty. That evening, while flipping channels on the motel TV to distract myself from my own thoughts, my phone buzzed again. A neighbor, Mrs. Hanley, texted a photo. It was Vera, sitting alone on the porch, elbows resting on her knees, staring out at nothing. The caption said only, "She's been out there for hours." I zoomed in. Vera looked smaller somehow, like time had caught up with her all at once. I thought I'd feel satisfaction. I didn't. I felt distance. That's all. Later that night, I logged onto a cloud backup from my laptop. For curiosity's sake, I pulled up the old family hallway photo on my phone, the one I wasn't in. A new picture had replaced it, Mrs. Hanley said. Just flowers now. Nothing personal, no people. Guilt? Or just a new design choice? I didn't care enough to guess. I opened a new document and titled it, closure log. I added entries by date, time of calls, who said what, screenshots, voicemails, Sable's message. I wasn't keeping it to reopen old wounds. I was keeping it to close the ones I never got a chance to name. I whispered aloud, I won't ghost them, but they'll never again get the version of me who asked to be let in. It had been a week since I locked the basement door behind me. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell a soul. But somehow, the silence made more noise than all the arguments I never bothered to start. I returned to the community center for the first time in months. The smell of old paper, floor polish, and too much donated coffee hit me before I even walked through the front door. A few heads turned. Mrs. Grogan from the front desk blinked, then smiled too wide, like someone seeing a ghost. I smiled back, small, polite. She didn't ask questions, just handed me the clipboard to sign in. I spent the afternoon helping sort donated books, simple titles, some with cracked spines, some still wrapped in plastic. A church friend of Vera's passed by the door at one point and did a double take. She leaned in, voice low. They're not saying much, but people are talking. I nodded once. That was enough. Later that day, back at the motel, a certified envelope waited for me at the front desk. White, formal, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Callista's. The script she used to sign Christmas cards and thank you notes, now used to file a complaint with the credit bureau. Inside was a letter stating that I had unknowingly triggered a review of shared credit activity. It was worded so carefully, I almost admired the effort. She was trying to get ahead of whatever investigation might come, trying to make it look like a clerical error. I took a photo of the letter, then forwarded it to my attorney friend with the caption, in case she tries to spin it. No rage, no panic, just management. I had finally learned that truth doesn't need volume, it needs clarity. That evening, while scrolling through old emails, my cousin Darlene sent me a file, a video. I tapped play and watched Vera, standing in the multi-purpose room of her church, speaking to a group of women seated in folding chairs with coffee in hand. Families are messy, she said, her voice slow, measured. But we should never let our wounds become weapons. The women nodded. One even hummed. Vera placed her hand on her chest. We pray and we forgive, because that's what binds us. I closed the video before it ended. It wasn't guilt, it was strategy. She didn't want to look like a mother who'd lost her child. She wanted to sound like a matriarch managing emotional logistics. It's not guilt, I whispered. It's fear of being irrelevant. The next morning, a text came from Sable. I didn't know how far it had gone, she wrote. You should have said something sooner. I stared at the message, then typed my response slowly. I did. You just weren't listening when it was still quiet. That was it. I didn't add a period. I didn't wait for her reply. I had no more to explain. That afternoon, I walked through downtown, trying to think of something else. I ended up near an empty storefront, one I used to pass without thought. Now, with the for lease sign in the window, and the late spring sunlight casting shadows across the floor, it looked like possibility. The space was plain, a little narrow, but it had a glass door and enough square footage to fit shelves, desks, and a dozen people who needed what I once needed, a place that saw them. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the sign. Hi, yes. I'd like to schedule a walkthrough for a community literacy hub. The key felt heavier than I expected, not just in weight, but in meaning. It turned smoothly in the lock, the deadbolt clicking like punctuation to the sentence I'd been too afraid to write for years. The storefront was modest, dusty shelves, cracked floor tiles, the faint scent of old paper still clinging to the air like a memory. But it was mine. Not inherited, not borrowed, not offered with conditions or guilt. Just square feet and air that belonged to no one until I stepped into it. I stood in the middle of the room for a while, the sunlight stretching long shadows across the bare floor. No legacy attached, I whispered, almost in awe. Just space that begins with me. The next day, I brought a folding table, my old laptop, and a box of books I'd saved from donation bins. I taped a handmade sign to the inside wall. Basement voices, literacy, dignity, and stories unwritten. It felt fitting. A little raw, but true. 2 volunteers from the library came by that week. Ellie brought coffee and pastries. Marcus helped reassemble the old bookshelves. No one asked about my family. They just showed up and saw me for what I was doing, not where I'd been hiding. That meant more than I could admit out loud. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. But I knew the penmanship, Vera's neat, schoolteacher cursive. It wasn't long. I don't know how to be a mother to a woman I underestimated. No apology, just that. I read it twice, folded it gently, placed it in a folder marked, kept, not replayed. Then I kept working. Callista called the following morning. Her name lit up my phone screen like a flare from a fire I had no interest in reigniting. I watched it ring, then silenced it. I imagined the conversation they'd want now. The polished reasoning. The carefully worded olive branches. But I didn't answer. I chose my new bookshelves instead. They didn't need an explanation, and neither did I. Not everything left behind needs to be reclaimed. That afternoon, I stood by the glass door of the space as the sun began to sink. The soft hum of street life drifted in, kids laughing across the street, a car door slamming, the gentle rattle of wind against the awning. I took out a marker and with slow, deliberate motion, wrote on the glass from the inside. Director, Marlene. It wasn't about ego, it was about visibility. They had tried to erase me, to trim me from photos, plans, wills, conversations. But I had rewritten myself. I stood there as the light faded, the letters drying into permanence behind the glass. They tried to erase me. I wrote myself in. The banner flapped slightly in the early summer breeze as I stepped back to admire it. White canvas, bold navy letters, basement voices, a literacy collective. I secured the final zip tie to the metal frame and felt the shift inside me. Not adrenaline, not nerves. Just a solid, anchoring pride. This wasn't something anyone handed me. It wasn't a role someone else carved out for me. This space bore my name, my fingerprints, my voice. No one could shrink it. People started to arrive. Neighbors, former library patrons, a few students I'd mentored back when I still wore that ID badge around my neck every weekday. Someone from the local paper took photos. A retired teacher I adored, Miss Langdon, cut the ribbon with shaky hands and a tearful smile. They tried to define me by my paycheck, I thought, but I defined myself by what I built. Inside, the center buzzed with the soft chaos of good things, chairs scraping, children's books being sorted, volunteers passing out lemonade in paper cups. 2 women from Vera's church, ones who used to avoid eye contact with me during Sunday coffee hour, stood by the snack table arranging fruit. One of them leaned in, speaking just above a whisper. "Your mom was quiet at service today," she said, "but she sent a donation." I nodded, offered a polite smile, and turned back to the registration table. I didn't need her money. I needed her honesty. Maybe this was her version of both. The small ceremony began in the corner, near a mural the kids had painted over the past week. A library board member said a few words, then someone nudged me forward. "I didn't prepare anything," I started, facing the small crowd. "But maybe that's better." I paused, letting my eyes settle on each face, noticing the ones I didn't expect to show up more than the ones I did. Sometimes, people tell you your story doesn't matter, but the moment you start reading it aloud, they have no choice but to hear it. They clapped. Not loud or theatrical, just enough to say, "We see you now." I didn't cry, but everything inside me softened. That evening, back at my apartment, the one above the bookstore where no one knew my middle name or how long I'd stayed in that basement, I turned on my laptop. I scrolled through the old folders, like flipping through photo albums. The file names read like journal entries, not mistakes. Verbatim, legacy theft. Then the one that held it all. Receipts, for me. I hovered over it for a moment. My finger hesitated, not because I wasn't sure, but because I was fully aware of what it meant to let it go. And then I deleted it. I kept it in case they ever doubted me again, I whispered, but I don't live to prove anything anymore. I shut the lid. It didn't feel like closing something. It felt like clearing space. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea cooling in my hand. The bookstore downstairs had closed for the evening, and the street had grown quiet except for the occasional rustle of breeze and muffled footsteps from passers-by. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, walked by holding a worn paperback I recognized from the center's lending library. She caught my eye and waved. "Thanks for helping us, Miss Marlene." I smiled. "You're welcome." She didn't know where I'd come from. She didn't know about basements or missing chairs or erased names. She only knew the woman who built a place where stories mattered. They once mocked the basement where I lived. Now they speak from it. They used to call me the quiet one, the girl who blended into family photos, who filled plates and cleared them without being asked, who lived downstairs, literally and metaphorically. But here's the truth I want you to remember. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's the gathering of strength. Sometimes it's the quiet before you build something louder than all the names they forgot to call you. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own story, I hope this reminded you that your voice still counts. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need applause to begin. What you build, what you become, can speak volumes, even in the absence of recognition. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to love you the most? Have you ever erased yourself just to keep the peace? I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, or just type 1 if this hit home. And hey, if this story touched something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. We've got more voices to lift, more silence to rewrite. Thank you for listening. You were never alone in the basement. And you're not alone now.